Well, welcome everyone. I want to welcome each and every one of you today to just a fabulous roundtable discussion that we're going to have about fair housing. And we have a number of very special guests today. My name is Denise Lonis of the Lonis Group, and I'm here with Frances Flynn Thorsen. And Frances is the founder of the Government Home Sales Professional Program, and she'll just be talking a little bit about that in a moment. We are also joined today by some wonderful guests. We have Scott Forsino here, and Scott is an attorney. Scott is also the president of Real Estate Advocates in Westchester, New York, and he's going to be sharing his brilliance on fair housing, and it's always great to have Scott in the house, that's for sure. We also are joined with Colleen Kulikowski. She is actually the first person to complete the Government Home Sales Professional Program. She is also managing partner of Town and Country Real Estate, Keller Williams Real Estate in Buffalo, New York. So we're thrilled to have her. And also I'm very excited about our next guest. Our next guest is Ardell Delalogia, and she is a managing broker of Sound Realty in Seattle, Washington, and she is a very successful blogger, and she has actually just written a really interesting blog that really addresses some of the issues in fair housing. So we're going to talk today a little bit about all of the confusion and misconceptions around fair housing, and there are a lot of them. So I'd like to start out today, actually, Scott, by asking you a few questions about fair housing. And, you know, there's been a number of changes to fair housing over the years, and I would just love if you could give the listeners just an overview of what is fair housing, what do they need to be aware of, you know, and what are the key things that they need to be paying attention to today.
Okay, thank you. I mean, the biggest thing regarding fair housing is the point to prevent any kind of segregation. Obviously, in the 60s and 70s in some of the East Coast cities, there was something called redlining, in which, believe it or not, minorities were specifically excluded from certain neighborhoods, and that has expanded to include races, creeds, colors, gender now, as far as everyone gaining access to housing, people with disabilities, new construction, city codes have given complete access to all new buildings regarding people with disabilities. So the fair housing was really just that, to give everyone a fair shake and not to be in response to what people called, flight from the suburbs regarding minority moving in.
And let me ask a little bit about, because people are always getting confused about the dates. And the Fair Housing Act was enacted in 1968, and then it was amended in 1988. And I think that, and then just recently again, there has just been a new addition also. So, you know, what do real estate agents today have to be really careful about? What are you seeing are the big errors that they're making? What are the biggies?
The two biggies are, I think, with regard to schools, and of course with people of different faiths, where in my area, I remember years ago, there used to be a phrase called walk to worship, and that implied a certain group could walk to a house of worship, and that was something that was deemed unacceptable because it really sought those type of buyers and no other. In addition to that, there's been in New York State, and I'm sure across the country, some Department of State testers where if you would mention education or school to a person of color, you would almost, there were instances in which I would say, people would say, sure, that school's okay. The same couple of that were not racial minorities would come in and ask for the same school system, and they moved from someplace completely outside the area like Minnesota or even Albany, and they say, oh, that's not what you want. I mean, it's a form of steering. It's a form of letting people think that something for different racial backgrounds was accepted where for others it was not. And that's the two big approaches then with regard to neighborhoods, schooling, even tax base. And in fact, when clients ask about crime areas, they are directed now, our counsel for our board directed people that we can do nothing more than direct them to relevant websites where they can find that information. You can't maybe even comment.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really important distinction because I'm finding that a lot of real estate agents believe that they just can't talk about any of this. And I think that, knowledge is power, and I think knowing what you can say and what you can't say is really important. And for the agents that are listening, I just want to review exactly what is this list? People are always wondering, what are the 7 protected classes? And I just want to review those. And then what I'd love you to do, Scott, is just add anything that you think is particularly important about each of those categories. So the 7 protected classes are race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin. And there was also a recent change that we're going to talk about a little bit later on that's also been added. But is there anything in that particular list that you find comes up more than another, and any tips that you've got for our listeners?
Well, one thing that that's gotten really a lot of press, of course, is the it's regrettable, but unfortunately, the tragedy of September 11th brought so many of these fear-based motivations to our decision making, where there's thought that in order to maintain a safe area, I know that realtors have almost not want to deal with anyone perceived to be a certain faith or acting as though that's a certain faith. That's something to really watch out for, and to, as you said, that's one of the protected classes. The only thing that really realtors have the clear license to handle is registered sex offenders. And that's a very touchy subject because someone could be the registered sex offender. I've heard instances in which teenagers getting together in the back seat, the male of that couple could be a registered sex offender, believe it or not. So there's, like in anything else, there's sex offenders, tragic ones, and then there's the really 16-year-old misguided couple who that young man has to put that on his college applications. But realtors do have the right to let people know where sex offenders live, and sex offenders have the obligation of letting the court or their system know when they're making a move, and so it has to change their where they're located. Realtors have to just observe these laws, gain all they can on a fair and impartial basis from buyers or sellers seeking. It's a problem because realtors deal with bigoted people, and regardless of what a client might wish, you have to let them know that's not something that your ethics allow.
One of the things you just brought up, you talk about sexual offenders and what agents' rights are and what they can and cannot do. This is a great segue to talk about Ardell's blog that she just wrote about. And Ardell, I'm going to move to you for just a moment. You just wrote a blog that was very insightful, very interesting, and I know that a lot of agents probably read it and thought, well, are you allowed to do this? Can you say this? There's a lot of, and in fact, your blog brought the discussion forward to both Fran and I, and we were excited to be able to talk about it. So I'd love you to share with us a little bit about the blog, the post that you just put out. Fabulous, very well done, and just talk a little bit about why you did that and why you thought it was really important to bring this issue to the forefront.
Sure. And the post on my blog, on Rank City Guide actually, that I think you're referring to is the one where I utilize various websites to highlight some of the things that buyers should be looking at when they're looking at a house. They should be looking at the schools. They should be looking at, and I have to say that Seattle, two things. One is that fair housing for any of us who have been in the industry for a number of years originally only related to seller and having a listing, what you can say in a listing. You can't say 2 blocks from the church. The things that Scott was talking about primarily dealt with what we can do in advertising when we're selling a house. That particular article that you're referring to, Denise, is directed to buyers and not to sellers. And, when buyer agency first came out, there was a question as to what if the buyer says, I will live here or there for various reasons, as opposed to a seller saying, I only want certain people to buy my house. And so there's been somewhat of a shift in what agents can and can't do. And most of the major brokerages would likely say, just don't talk about anything. But how practical is that when you have a buyer client? When you have a seller client, absolutely, by the way. You're selling a house. Talk about the house. Don't talk about the people. Don't talk about who might buy the house. But when you have a buyer, and I'll tell you, this goes way, way back. I also, one other distinction is states have different protected classes as well. So knowing the federal guideline is not the be-all, end-all of fair housing, because some states have more protected classes than others. Is that true, Scott?
Under federal law, no, but under the federal law is the baseline. The states could have more. I mean, we have, like, for instance, in
Correct.
New York City and the reasonable suburbs around, there's co-ops, and that's really kind of unique to New York, where those
we have
co-ops.
No, we have co-ops. Yeah.
A lot
we
of
have co-ops in Seattle.
And those are little tiny private fiefdoms, and it only is in, I think, one county, Suffolk County out in Long Island, where the agents, I mean, the rule is that you're not allowed to discriminate based on any of those other important reasons, race, creed, color, anything. But they can keep out lawyers and Howard Stern and Madonna and rock and roll drummers. They can do that before they had to.
What I'm referencing, because it's a big issue in Seattle, is sexual preference. I don't think every state has sexual preference as to a protected class. And I remember when I lived in Philadelphia, when they added that to the city, as opposed to, as regarding gay rights, and protected class. I don't think every state includes the exact same protected classes. And so an agent has to go beyond federal and make sure they're also dealing with the local as well.
And Ardell, that's a good point. I just wanted to clarify right now for our listeners. I want to talk about that. The National Association of Realtors made a change to Article 10 of the Realtors Code of Ethics. And Fran, actually, I want to talk more to Ardell about her blog and exactly what she put in there, because I thought it was really, really valuable. But do you want to address that right now, or Scott, do you want to address that? Because there was that change, and I think, and that had to do with sexual orientation. I think it's a really good thing to address.
Yeah, Ardell, if you brought it up, please.
I would like to just say one thing about that.
New York have that
in the meantime, because NAR did take a leadership position and do that, and that was laudable. But at the same time, realtors, as Ardell says, the law is different from state to state. And actually, in Tennessee right now, there is legislation on the books here that is actually preventing teachers or telling teachers that they can punish kids in school who use the word gay. I mean, they're not allowed to use the word gay in the classroom, and kids even whose parents may be gay are not allowed to use the word. So there is a lot of a lot of mixed signals between legislators, between the Realtor Code of Ethics, fair housing. So in some areas that are more progressive, where people respect rights of all people, that's one thing, but there are also states and places in the country where there is, direction that's entirely different.
And I think that Ardell made a really good point to agents, and that is, just knowing what's going on federally isn't enough. So Ardell, talk a little bit about, in the blog you talk about crime, you talk about schools, and you talk about sexual predators. And I know that some agents think you're not allowed to do any of that. And, again, it's about people knowing and knowing, and being educated and knowing what they can and can't do. What response did you get to the blog post that you had? And tell us just a little bit more about how you decided to put that together, because it's very well done.
Well, and I'll tell you, in the Seattle area, we are, I would say, pretty close to the tech capital of the world. And so, most of my clients are pretty adept at finding publicly available information. And, so, I try to write to the audience that is both my client and people who maybe should be doing things more the way that my clients do it, if that makes any sense. Because as agents in this day and age, we learn as much from our clients and how they're accessing public information. We also have sites that are expanded and advanced beyond the normal realtor site. When you have the normal realtor sites for years and years and years, and I've been in the business for 21 years, have really not changed as dramatically as some of the newer alternative models. So on a regular, on a traditional broker site, we'll call them traditional if that has a meaning, you normally wouldn't find school information as to school rankings. But in Seattle, we have Redfin. And Redfin, every time you enter a listing in the MLS system, Redfin gives on its site the school ranking for the schools in the area, not necessarily for the school associated by the house. In other words, they don't do the school boundary lines, but they do show the school rankings on the site. I personally think they're giving too much credit to the website that is coming up with these rankings. Yet a parent, obviously, they rank it from 1 to 10, that particular site. Ranks the school from 1 to 10 on whatever basis. And then you have, very important here, something called walk score. So walkscore.com gives it a 97% rating for walking, and yet you go and find that it also has the highest number of sexual predators or crimes. So you have to look at what I was recommending in that blog post is that you look at walk score in combination with a site called HomeFacts. HomeFacts, which gives you the sexual predator information, and there was something else on there that I recommended. And also, the school ranking site, that's the site I used for the post was greatschools.org, because that is the site that Redfin uses when you list a property and shows that information on the property for the benefit of the buying public who's viewing property on the Internet. So what you have now, and there's a misconception about what does it mean when you say buyers start their search on the Internet. Agents tend to think that means, it's about pretty pictures. And maybe it is for most of the country. But in Seattle, that's not true. They start their search on the Internet by looking at everything, by looking at the information in the county parcel viewer. They can see the lot. They can go to bird's eye view and see if there's an electric tower behind the house that isn't showing in the MLS photos. They can go to walk score and HomeFacts and determine whether or not it's a neighborhood and the school information that they choose to live in. So the Internet search is not merely about what agents want them to look at. It's about everything that they need to know. And that's what that post brings out, is that, your search on the Internet, and I'm very big on buyers, focusing on the where versus the what. Forget about the granite counters. First let's talk about where do you want to live. And in fair housing, from a seller's perspective, and I worked back in the day when buyers were not represented at all, right? We all represented sellers. And you were not allowed to talk about anything at all that had to do with people. But when you're dealing with a buyer, the buyer is asking, to see homes only in schools ranked by, I have clients every day like this, by the way. I only want to live in a school that's ranked 8 to 10. Well, that's their right. I'm not telling them what's an 8 to 10. They're telling me, because they're getting it from a website. And the website says, in this town, in this city, Kirkland as example, which is an area I work, there's maybe half the schools are 8, 9, or 10, and they say I want to live in the neighborhood in the boundaries of those schools. Do you see that as a problem, Scott, for somebody to say I want to live in an 8 to 10 ranked school? I mean, I don't see where that has to do with protected class.
I think that I want to live in an 8 to 10 ranked school. Why not? But that's If it's possible, if the house and the price and your ability to buy is all matched up with that, then no, I wouldn't say it's a problem. I mean, why?
So there's no reason for agents to not talk about with a buyer client. Well, and the same thing when somebody lists a house and they say this is in the award-winning Lake Washington School District. I mean, the agents have done that for years.
See, let me say that the crux of a problem that's happening here is that these, for want of a better word, interlopers, these websites that are not bound by all the rules we are. See, that's the problem. That they're doing something they have no obligation to respect. These are vendors. They want to make money. They're not imbued with the obligations we are. So that means, let's say there's a perfect website that will get you all you want out of life and all you want out of real estate business. But guess what? If using it is violative of your ethics, then so WalkScore might be great. It might have, it may have a church and a synagogue, and it may have, every kind of thing but that doesn't mean that it can be used. Now it can be used for someone like my sister who's a broker, or Joe Ferrara that was a broker but not part of NAR or their local board. They do not have the same ethical requirements we do. So that's the problem.
Yeah, don't say we, because I'm not a member of NAR.
Okay, I got you.
In Seattle, it's not an imperative, because in Seattle, our MLS system is not connected to the Association of Realtors.
Interesting. Well, that's unusual. Most times they are inextricably linked, as you can imagine, and that's really our challenge here, is that there's these great sites, but they're when the tech nerds somewhere in coffee bean world they're not even contemplating the things that are.
I think coffee bean world is a protected class in Seattle.
It might be right, exactly.
Well, Scott, you bring up a really good point, and that is that some of these sites, the question is, okay, and this is one of the questions I wanted to ask Colleen. Colleen, you're out there blogging, and you've been blogging for a long time, a very successful blogger. What are you hearing from people that they're asking you that they're just really confused about? Where is the big confusion? Because I know that you've seen this a lot. A lot of people just kind of going, I don't know. What can I say? What words can I use? What words can I use? I mean, there's a lot of confusion out there. So, Colleen, what are people asking of you? What are they saying to you that they want to know about? And we're going to get an opinion from Fran and Scott. And
Realtors are finding it very confusing as to what information we can and cannot give out. To me, it has always been expressed that I can give them the link to the website that provides them the information, but I can't print it out and hand it to them. Because then I'm sifting through and sorting information. Right. So that's the biggest problem for a lot of people, is like, well, I want this information. What is this information? And I have to tell them, go to the website and look it up. And it's very confusing for them. Ardell was just talking about schools. Well, a local newspaper here, Business First, just produced their comprehensive list of communities and all the schools, and I send them to that because that's the most reliable piece of information about school districts. We have a lot of people relocating into the area, and they are coming from other areas, and they want to know what schools are what and how well they rate to other schools, and I can't discuss that. I can only point them to the information. I can't give my opinion.
But why can't you? Why can't you talk to your client about schools?
Well, I think
what protected class is there in federal fair housing to not have a conversation with a client that's paying? And this is what brings up, and I'm going to cross over here a second, as to do people need an agent? If they can get more information from outside of the agent world, then, and the agent's not allowed to talk about anything that they want to know, then we really have diluted the value of having an agent, because somebody's paying us. For me, my average commissions are between $10,000 and $20,000. Nobody's going to pay me $20,000 to say I'm not allowed to talk to you about anything.
Right.
Which I think brings up a really good point. I think the point that both Colleen and Ardell are bringing up is that, I think we're in a time of a lot of change, and I think that not everybody's playing by the same rules. So you have a lot of these sites online that, are not, they don't play by the same rules we do. And, consumers, I think, today are really wanting and demanding a lot of information. Scott, how would you address this issue, especially the issue around, what Colleen was just bringing up, this confusion around what we are allowed to do and say? Where do we get it right? How do we get this right?
I've told agents that I've had, and I've told other agents, that any professional, or I should say any fiduciary, has an obligation to them. However, there are still ethical requirements that must be met. And as a lawyer, there's the ethical canons, and then the bad news, the disciplinary rules, if you don't obey the ethical canons. So it's not just that, I'm on your side, you're my advocate, do whatever I want, hell be damned. It's not. It can't be. Let them know that we are only working. We only have a career. We only have a collective profession if and when these duties are obeyed. So in that instance with the school thing, that makes sense. I get the point. If a buyer's saying, you mean you're going to point me to a website and you can't tell me what's good for me? Well, if telling someone who is not in a racial minority what is good for them, if that's not the same thing you would say to a racial minority, then you're putting your butt on the line. You're not acting ethically. There's a whole host of things that are wrong with that. It's a matter of, listen, I can direct you as your advocate, as your representative, as someone who has your fiduciary interest in mind, to these resources where you can read them and come back with questions. I mean, see, it's not the end of the road. I direct you to a website. That doesn't mean that they can't read them and then come back with questions and say, well, does that mean that, Scarsdale is dynamite, but, another part of the county is not as dynamite? Well, I got to say, listen, if the scores are in the 95 percentile and the others are in the 50 percentile, what do you think? I mean, I talk to clients rough because, you're buying the house, not me. So you got to have some, something going. You can't walk around like a mental midget. You got to, if you look at the statistics and you see that someone is the top, something is very, very highly rated, and then you see that others are not, what inference can be drawn from there? They have. I mean, they're ultimately making decisions.
I think to say that the school ranking has anything to do with a protected class is a discriminatory comment in the first place, because
absolutely.
That, I mean, so to me, if you talk to people about schools, and there's no way around talking about schools, I don't think that a buyer's agent. Now, let's separate that, because agents have two roles in life. Sometimes they wear a seller hat, and sometimes they wear a buyer hat. And when the seller, when you're wearing a seller hat, and before there were websites, before there was an MLS system, and I am that old.
Ardell, I'm that old too. That was in the good old days. There are a few of us
I
on the phone that are this old.
I mean, schools have always been part of real estate, and I have, when someone says to me, what's a good school, if the agent has the school in their ad, you know it's a good school, because they're not going to put the school in the ad if it's not a good school. And so
I always ask, what I've always asked?
time.
When people say, what kind of schools, I'd say, what kind of student do you have? I mean, who cares how good the school is if your kid doesn't do homework and plays video games? That's the craziest question.
Well,
it's a one-side.
But
it's a crazy question.
But it isn't in real estate. It isn't a crazy question, because 90% of home buyers are looking at school, not just the ones that are from out of area. They may have different standards for school. I've had clients who say, look, Ardell, I don't want my kid to have the pressure of that 10 school, because those kids are just pulling their hair out. The discussion of school isn't always highest and best, by the way. Some people don't want highest and best because they think there's too much stress on the student. But the discussion of schools and real estate, because the school system influences pricing dramatically. I've run posts on the same house in 5 different school districts, and the variance in price was from $250,000 up to $650,000, depending on the school district. The exact same house, if you move it into a different school zone, will change because the land value is higher, depending on the school ranking. So you can't separate school from real estate because it's part of the valuation of that property.
And I think the point that Scott was making, which I appreciate, Scott, was the comment you made about, are you giving the same information to 2 different parties? And that's exactly what fair housing is about. I want to speak with Fran for a moment. Fran, you've written 2 books about HUD homes. One for consumers, one for agents. You're very familiar with fair housing. You've been around a long time, and you have some very, very good information that I think that we need to hear. So tell me what your thoughts are on this fair housing discussion.
Yeah, I think that it's a great discussion. It boils down to treating everybody equally. So if you're going to give some kind of information to, one buyer, you just have to give the same information to all buyers. Schools, I heard Ardell say, I think, that somebody had schools in an ad. I can't imagine putting a school in a real estate ad. Actually, I think that's kind of over the line to have to specify a school district. Did I hear you right, Ardell?
I hear it. I have seen that for as long as I've been in real estate.
Yeah, I
stopped seeing that. What they'll say is award-winning district. In other words, if a district has received an award, right?
Yeah, I haven't seen that in a long time, and it stopped pretty shortly after 1988 in places where I've looked. So I haven't seen that. I know that there have been some recent actions right now, and that they're very, very HUD is very, very actively pursuing. There was a case just announced a couple of weeks ago where somebody was fined huge amounts of money for an ad that talked about, that said no kids. I mean, can you imagine somebody actually being stupid enough to do that? But they said no kids. So there's still a lot of this stuff happening, and HUD is still taking them to task. There was also an issue involving a mortgage lender who had denied financing to a woman who was pregnant. She was on a paid leave of absence, and they denied her a mortgage because she was pregnant, and that was just a shame. So I think that
but that's a protected class. An award-winning school is not a protected class, right? It's not
an award-winning school is and talking about the school district could be perceived as it's taking people away from another school district. So I don't know. I think I haven't seen anybody advertising school districts in a long time. I would be really, really careful about that. I do see another interesting trend that's happening too, and I would love to hear what you guys have to think about it. And that is some of the discussion around religion. There are actually, what do you think about setting up, mutual, exclusive real estate groups for religion? You take a look over at Active Rain right now. There are an awful lot of, Christian evangelical groups. What's that?
It bothers me. It's funny because I wrote a post called "Sex and Real Estate," by the way, which was about floor plans. Was about where the master bedroom sits in the house. And it was called Sex and Real Estate. And I've wanted to write one about religion and real estate because they're really, what I think the agent is trying to say is to try to equate his religious conviction. There was a very popular young man who used to his actual, instead of his picture, he had a cross. And I really had a hard time talking to him at all because I didn't want to associate myself with somebody who's holding a cross up, in real estate.
Well, and we see that.
I don't like that. I don't like it.
No, I agree. I think we're seeing these groups, and again, it's not a reflection on the religion, but it's bringing it into real estate and creating channels around exclusivity in religion, and actually stating that that they're I'm a Christian agent and I work with Christian buyers, and actually having logos next to the SFR logo. There's a Christian logo, and saying that you're not going to you're not going to go to heaven if you don't embrace Jesus. I know that there are a lot of people who of other faiths who are highly, highly offended by that. I see it as a growing trend, and frankly, it really, really surprises me that there's not more discussion about that in the blogging community, because there are an unbelievable number of those types of groups, and the language there is, it's not just about religion; it's about religion and real estate. So, what's your thought? What's your thought, Scott? I mean, I just find that just a little bit bizarre.
I'm kind of torn because if people want to say, listen, I'm one of for someone of that basis, I was trying to jump on when you said this. It's a big deal to say I'm a realtor, right? I mean, I have these ethics. I used to say to people, well, if you got it, people said, why should I work with a realtor? And I said, well, if you got an offer on your house, would you want to know about it? And they said, of course. I said, well, a realtor must tell you. An agent does not have to tell you. They found that incredulous. I said, that's the truth. So that's the first thing.
Tell you what? That you don't have an offer? That's a state law, dear. You don't have to be a realtor to bring an offer to a seller. That's a state law, not a NAR code.
Well, in the Code of Ethics, there's one of the provisions that says that you have to, relay all offers or.
So does every state law that I know of. So does every state law, DOL licensing law that I know of.
Okay. Well,
I've worked in 5 states. I've worked in 5 states on both coasts. There's every state that I don't think the only distinction that I saw once in Florida, because I've worked in, by the way, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, California, and Washington. In all states, written offers must be presented. In all states, verbal offers do not. There are a couple of states that require a verbal offer to be presented.
I was using that as an example. If you think that being a member of NAR or a accredited buyer represent any of the alphabet soup designations that exist, if people think that's a way to demonstrate that I'm someone you want to do business with and that I'm someone that's credible, I'm sure that people who are fervent in their faith are looking to wear that on their sleeve as well and say, look, work with me because I'm like you, and I've heard of that in the context of gay brokers and agents, gay-friendly. I've heard that in the context of, I've seen it all in New York where there's people who really would rather deal with someone of their own ilk. And, unfortunately, so much fairness is legislated, but it really might go against some of the strongly held generational beliefs. I know a broker told me in my area that they lost a client because she is observant Jewish faith. And that meant she couldn't work on Saturday. And when do you think these buyers want to look at homes? Saturday. That's exactly. They work Monday to Friday. They are in the suburbs on the weekends. So they said, so our agent can't help us precisely when we need help. So they didn't. And the agent told me the story. And she said, you know what?
Well,
I have to understand that.
That's the big Seinfeld. That's the big Seinfeld case. Their agent was off on a Sabbath, and that's when they wanted to
Exactly. That's why life imitates art. Exactly. And that was only on Seinfeld because that really happened in real life.
But that's because they're not working on Saturday. It's not because of a religious preference,
Not at all.
And by the way, not all Jewish people take off on Saturday.
Let me bring a couple of real-life examples. I want to give you guys 2 real-life examples that I'm aware of right now to do with religion. One was where a lady advertised, and what she said is this is my religious faith, and I will not help you buy a home or sell a home for you if you're not of the same religious faith. And that was a problem. That is a problem because, again, you're making a strong, that's a pretty clear-cut case. I think what's happening, though, and you see this online all the time, is that people do like to associate with people of like mind, and of like faith and of like, of like likes. And what's happening is I think that the message that I want agents to get today from our discussion is that, fair housing it's complicated, and you have to understand, you have to know, you got to know it inside and out. I really believe that. The other instance happened where a listing agent went to a home, and the seller said to them, well, okay, thank you for the offer. We're really thrilled about this offer. Now, I need you to tell me what religious faith are the people that are making the offer. And the agent made the mistake of saying this is their religious faith instead of, when a seller asks you that question directly, you have to answer, that's a violation of the Fair Housing Act, and that didn't happen. Those are two instances where I know of where the Fair Housing Act, it was pretty cut and dried. Some of the stuff that we're talking about isn't so cut and dried. But, there's so much discussion out here right now about what can I say, what can't I say, what can I do, what can't I do. And I think that we need to talk about fair housing more. I don't think that there's enough discussion about it because I don't think agents know enough. When I have just this week asked a number of agents that I work with, let me ask you some basic fair housing questions. And I'll tell you that most of them are not going to pass the basic fair housing test because there's a lot to it and because our world is changing. But those were two examples that were, very obvious. I want to go back for a minute to Colleen because, Colleen, you're blogging a lot and you see a lot of stuff. Are you seeing what you would say would be some pretty obvious violations? Do you see people just, out there online doing crazy things, or are you thinking that or seeing that maybe people are not really discussing it that much because they just don't know? What are you seeing more of?
I see a lot of minor mistakes with people with fair housing, like Scott and I were talking earlier, walk to worship, walk to the, you can't say that in an ad, or the great family home could be exclusionary, so you got to be careful in your advertising that way. With regards to the blogging, I think everybody just kind of stays away from fair housing. They just kind of think if they ignore it, it'll go away. And I think it's more important to write a little bit about it every so often and bring it to the forefront so that people understand it and I refresh it in my own mind.
Excellent.
Well, and walk to worship so that people understand the walk to worship thing. And again, if you're representing the seller, no mention. But you could have a buyer client and that their religion states that they are not allowed to drive a car to worship. And that is when I worked on the East Coast was more common. I would have clients say, Ardell, I have to live walking distance because of my religion. So if it's the buyer's religion that precludes them from driving a car to worship, and you are that buyer's agent, then you have to be able to discuss your client's preferences. Years ago, and I don't know if Francis remembers this, when buyer agency first came out and buyer and the exclusive buyer agents were trying to get more direction as to how they can meet their buyer's list of needs. What were the guidelines there? And HUD actually backed up on that and said, look, if your client has to do that, well, that's your client, and you have to find them a house that meets their needs, whether their needs are a large yard, 5 bedrooms, and walk to this place, whether that be work.
Well,
my clients like to walk to work, right? Yeah.
Well, I do remember that, Ardell, but I think that we probably disagree on the walk with the buyers. I know that there was really, really strong advisement against that, even for a buyer's agent, because what is even walking distance? How do you define walking distance? You have to be very, very specific. If it's 2 miles or 3 miles from the place of worship, is that out of out of distance? So I know that a lot of the legal advice that we were hearing when that happened really, really cautioned agents even about that walk to worship, even as buyer agents. And I remember when, of course, when buyer agency finally happened, I don't think agents got a pass on it. That's not how I remember that.
Yeah, well, they flip-flop back and forth, but the reality is if the client gives you, and I've had this all kinds of things where people need certain accommodations, and if they give you a map of where they want to live, reason.
That's
well,
something
then
else.
If you have
a radius, if you have a radius and they specify the radius, I think one of the things that's happening is that a lot of things are becoming common and customary, and a lot of without a lot of thought to best practices with fair housing. And there's not a lot of enforcement across the board. Just like with HUD homes that has an unbelievably high fraud rate, the HUD Inspector General's office is really, really busy. They're busy investigating a lot of big guys. They're going up to the big guys. A lot of the little guys in the HUD home sales are getting off the hook. Who are creating a lot of fraud. A lot of people who are creating a lot of mistakes or making a lot of mistakes in fair housing are getting off the hook simply because they don't have the manpower to enforce. And that's one of the things that underscores the importance of just understanding what it's about and having some discussion about it and a little bit of advice when people are doing the wrong thing, because there isn't the kind of enforcement that sends those big waves of consciousness raising across the industry, because they simply don't have the manpower. And of course, with social media and all of the discussion and all of these groups and lots of just discussion getting out of hand, it looks like, well, if nobody's getting caught and nobody's getting punished, then there's probably nothing wrong with it. I think there's a lot wrong. I think that there's a lot of that type of misstep. I think there's certainly just a slowdown in enforcement because there's not the manpower, and that's not a reason to do it because a lot of other people are doing it. And that's what I hear a lot.
Well, what I would like to do is, this whole conversation is so fascinating because even within this call, even within this discussion, there are different points of view, different opinions. What I would love to do is I would love to give everybody an opportunity to give their final thoughts on fair housing. What is it that you want agents to know? What is it that you want them to remember? Scott, I'm going to start with you.
I think they should know that it is vitally important that it can't be that the business of real estate can't suffer any more black eyes or real prejudice to groups that deserve the legal protection that they enjoy. I think that it's something that should be the subject of office meetings. I don't also think it's a very hard thing. I think if there was a protocol and put together on a PDF, people should either know enough about the content that they can ask the right questions or be given the right questions, and let people, and further, probably lastly, give those prospective clients the proper reasoning why they wouldn't feel let down, despite their own inclinations. They'd understand that they're dealing with a real professional, and within the context of the business and profession, these rules must be followed. That's what I wish.
Excellent. Excellent. Ardell.
I think that my number one thing to agents would be to say that the bottom line answer can't be, I can't do anything. Know your laws. Know what your protected class is in your area, and stay within that law. But to say, I can't do anything at all, sit on your hands, that might protect you, might protect your broker, but it might not help your client. So make sure that you're not negating things that are not against any law just because you prefer not to mention anything at all that you might be covered but might not be covered.
Excellent. Colleen.
You have to provide a good service, in other words, within the law.
Excellent. Colleen?
Which I would say with regards to Ardell is, put together a really comprehensive list of resources for your clients so that they can find the information they need to find out, and be open and honest and say, if you have questions after you get to a site, we can have another discussion, but here's some of the things that we can help you with, and give them the information they need, but then also be willing to have a further discussion once they find it, because sometimes some of the information is confusing.
Absolutely. Fran, closing thoughts.
Absolutely. I have a thought about this. I think that there are people who are in the real estate business who have jobs. Their jobs are to sell houses and work with sellers and work with buyers. And we have another segment of the industry, of the housing industry, that's about housing. And in some places in the country, just like the laws are different, the culture is different. We are faced with enormous foreclosure things happening right now, foreclosures all over the country. And some states are working very, very closely. Some state realtor associations, some local realtor associations are working very, very closely with the people in the housing industry. I think it's time to put the housing back into real estate. I know that Washington State's done a great job. New York has been fantastic. Florida has been fantastic. California, there have been states who have been working with some monies from NAR. A couple of years ago, NAR put a couple $1 million into a foreclosure prevention relief fund, and some states took that money and spent it and worked in partnership with housing people in the state, with HUD counselors, helping them. And I think that culture of it's them or us needs to be a thing of the past. In Arizona, it was just the realtor associations did nothing except take that money to use it to educate buyer agents. And not that a buyer agent education is wrong, but there was no balance because all of the money went to show buyer agents, buyers how to get the best deals on the foreclosures, and there was no attention paid to home retention. So I think that the culture in the housing industry, the people who are working with HUD, the HUD homes counselors, and the people in that genre, bring a lot to the table, and that a communion of thought around housing and real estate is going to be a better thing for the country in the long term than just, okay, our job is to sell houses and that's it. The real estate industry also includes people who are living in houses, who want to stay in houses, and I think that we need to see more of a communion of housing and real estate.
Excellent. And, my final thoughts are that we all work and live in different markets, and I think that agents definitely have a responsibility to know the law, as Ardell said. And as Scott said, I think it's really important that you pay a lot of attention to those protected classes. One of the things that I think is really important is, as an agent, get educated. As a broker or a manager, I firmly believe, because I'm also a broker, it is our responsibility to educate the people that are working with us. And a great way to do that, when I was an active broker of a very large real estate company, what I would do is at every one of my meetings, I would say, here's an example of fair housing. Yes or no, can we do this, can't we? And I would educate them. And what would happen is, very soon, because we used real live scenarios and situations, is agents started to get it. And I think that fair housing isn't talked about enough. It isn't brought to the forefront enough. So, because of that, I want to thank everybody that was on today's call, Fran and Scott and Colleen and Ardell. I want to thank everybody for taking your precious time and bringing to light a really important issue that needs to be talked about. There was so much great discussion today, and that just goes to show you that, we've got a lot to talk about. So on behalf of everybody on the call, and Fran and myself, I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I look forward to another lively chat again. What a great team today. Absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you guys. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to our listeners, and I look forward to talking to you guys again. Take care.